A cruel man abandoned a German shepherd to die slowly, but fate had a stunning twist in store. What he didn't know was that this dog possessed skills beyond anyone's imagination. A story of cruelty transformed into redemption that will make you believe in second chances. Prepare for an emotional journey that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you're watching this surprising video from. What makes a man abandon a being that knows only loyalty? What goes through the soul of someone who locks trusting eyes behind a rusty gate, leaving behind only insufficient water, no food, and a fate sealed by cruelty? In the small town of Ridgeview, where time seems to move a little slower, and traditions still echo in the weathered clapboard of old houses, a farmer, his face marked by time and his soul eaten away by resentment, has just committed an act that will forever change not only his life, but that of an entire community. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky over the rolling countryside with orange hues that seemed to bleed over the distant hills. Arthur, 42, with deep-set eyes and calloused hands, locked with unnecessary force the padlock that would keep a majestic German shepherd imprisoned in an abandoned cabin on the edge of his property. The animal, confused, looked at his tormentor with the kind of incomprehension only the innocent can express in the face of senseless cruelty. And he wasn't just any dog. The townspeople affectionately called him Guardian, a name that carried a much deeper history than the farmer could possibly imagine. "You'll stay here till the end," Arthur muttered, unable to meet the animals. "Geese, I don't need anything else reminding me of the past." With heavy steps, he walked away while the dog's desperate barks echoed across the vastness of the farm, a sound that, though distant, seemed to follow Arthur like an accusing specter. The property, once prosperous, was now just a dull reflection of its former self. Piles of unpaid bills accumulated on the solid wood table in the main room, while empty bourbon bottles testified to the nights Arthur tried to drown the painful memories that haunted him. There was something deeper behind those dull eyes, something that even alcohol couldn't completely erase. As the farmer headed back home, carrying not only the weight of his debts, but also the invisible burden of his own conscience, Guardian began his fight for survival. And what a fight it would be. What Arthur didn't know was that this seemingly ordinary animal carried an extraordinary past, a past of intense training in a special search and rescue unit, where he learned to survive in extreme conditions and find people in nearly impossible situations. In the small town, whispers about Arthur's unstable temper were already circulating freely. Mary, owner of the only local bakery, commented to her customers while baking cornbread in the wood-fired oven, "Ever since he lost everything in those bad investments, he's become a different person. It's like a bitter spirit took hold of him." And it wasn't untrue. Years ago, Arthur had gambled all his savings on investments that promised to multiply his fortune. The result was a dizzying fall that took not only his money, but also his ability to trust anyone. Night fell heavily on the cabin where Guardian was trapped. The animal methodically began to analyze his surroundings. It wasn't the first time. He'd found himself confined. Years of training had taught the dog how to assess a space, identify weak points, and above all, remain calm. His attentive eyes examined every plank, every crack, every possibility of escape. Thirst was already tightening his throat. The little water left was dirty and insufficient. The next morning, as the town awoke to the crowing of roosters and the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the windows of simple houses, a gray-haired woman with an elegant posture unloaded boxes from a small moving truck. Eleanor, 68, a retired teacher, had chosen Ridgeview as a refuge to heal the wounds life had inflicted upon her. Just 3 months earlier, she had lost her beloved grandson, Matthew, in a car accident. The pain was still so raw that sometimes she woke in the middle of the night believing she heard the boy's laughter echoing through the house. "Are you sure you want to stay in this isolated house, ma'am?" asked the truck driver, placing the last box on the ground. "A lady all alone, far from everything." Eleanor adjusted her glasses and smiled with the serenity only those who have weathered great storms can show. "Sometimes it's in the silence that we find the answers to our hardest questions," she replied, looking at the small house that bordered Arthur's property, separated only by a narrow creek and some leafy trees. What none of them knew at that moment was that fate was already beginning to weave its invisible threads, intertwining lives that seemed to have no apparent connection. While Eleanor arranged her books on the wooden shelves, carefully placing photographs of her grandson, Guardian began his second day of confinement, increasingly determined to find a way out. It was in the early hours of the third day that everything began to change. With the persistence known only to those fighting for survival, Guardian had identified a weak spot in the fence surrounding the cabin. The soil, softened by recent rains, allowed him to dig relentlessly, ignoring his injured paws and extreme fatigue. As the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, enough space had been cleared. Freedom was within reach of his battered paws. Guardian's instinct guided him through the dense woods, following the course of the creek that snaked through the property. Weakened by hunger and thirst, he advanced with difficulty but with unwavering determination. It was then that the smell of freshly prepared food reached his sensitive nostrils, an aroma that promised salvation. In the small house by the creek, Eleanor was preparing her simple breakfast: homemade bread with butter and a steaming cup of coffee with cream. The sound of scratching at her kitchen door made her pause mid-buttering. Cautiously she approached, and upon opening the door, was faced with a scene that tugged at her heartstrings. A large German shepherd, visibly gaunt, looking at her with a mixture of desperation and hope. "Dear Lord," Eleanor exclaimed, placing a hand on her chest. "Where did you come from, you poor creature?" Guardian remained motionless, as if understanding that his fate depended on this crucial moment. There was something in the animal's gaze that deeply touched the retired teacher's heart, perhaps because she too knew the weight of loneliness and abandonment. "Come, come," she called, opening the door wider. "You look like you desperately need water and food." That was the beginning of a journey neither of them could have predicted. With maternal care, Eleanor treated the animal's wounds, offered him clean water, and set aside a generous piece of roast she had in the refrigerator. Guardian devoured everything with the eagerness of one who had known true hunger, while the woman watched him with a mixture of compassion and curiosity. "You have an owner, don't you?" she murmured, noticing the animal's distinct posture, even in his weakened state. "You're not just some stray dog that got lost. There's something special about you, isn't there?" The following days were ones of gradual recovery. Guardian gained strength with each meal, while Eleanor was surprised by the animal's unusual behavior. He seemed to understand commands she hadn't even taught him, showed peculiar attention to external sounds, and, most impressively, seemed to observe her with an intelligence that went beyond what she had ever seen in other dogs. In town, news traveled fast, as is typical in small places where everyone knows each other. Eleanor, the new teacher, took in a huge dog that showed up at her door. People commented in line at the general store. "They say he's a handsome animal, despite showing up all injured." These conversations soon reached Arthur's ears. Sitting in his usual corner at the town's only tavern, he listened in silence while the weight of what he had done began to grow inside him. It wasn't regret, at least he didn't admit it to himself, but something uncomfortable settling in his chest with every sip of bourbon he took. A week had passed since Guardian found refuge in Eleanor's house when the sky over Ridgeview suddenly darkened, heralding a storm brewing on the horizon. The wind began to howl through the trees, while the first heavy drops of rain fell forcefully on the roofs of the houses. "Looks like a bad storm's coming," Eleanor murmured to herself, closing the living room windows. Guardian, who had become her constant shadow, seemed restless, pacing back and forth in the house as if sensing something beyond just the rain. It was while trying to close the back window, which had jammed, that the accident happened. A particularly strong gust of wind pushed the window, causing Eleanor to lose her balance. As she tried to steady herself, her foot slipped on the floor, already wet from the incoming rain. The fall was quick and painful. Her elderly body hit the ceramic tile floor with a dull thud. "Oh dear God," she groaned, trying to get up, only to feel excruciating pain in her hip. "No, I can't move." The rain now fell mercilessly, turning the ground around the house into an impassable muddy mess. Eleanor was alone, fallen on the floor, unable to reach the phone on the table, just a few feet away that seemed like miles in her situation. It was at this moment that Guardian demonstrated for the first time what he was truly capable of. The animal approached her, assessing the situation with surprising calm. His intelligent eyes seemed to calculate distances, analyze possibilities. Without Eleanor needing to say a word, he went to the table where the landline phone was. With impressive precision, he picked up the receiver with his mouth and brought it to her, placing it within reach of her trembling hands. How did you?" Eleanor stammered, eyes wide with surprise as she took the phone. Her hands shook as she dialed 911, but her heart was filled with a sense of awe at what she had just witnessed. The ambulance took over an hour to arrive, battling the muddy, nearly impassable roads. During that entire time, Guardian remained by Eleanor's side like a silent guardian, offering the comfort of his presence and the warmth of his body. When the paramedics finally managed to enter the house, they found an unusual scene. An elderly woman lying on the floor, her head resting on the body of an imposing German shepherd who watched them attentively, as if assessing whether they were trustworthy. "In 30 years on the job, I've never seen anything like it," commented one of the paramedics as they placed Eleanor on the stretcher. "This dog seems to know exactly what he's doing." At the county hospital in the neighboring larger town, the diagnosis confirmed what Eleanor already suspected: a fractured hip, a serious and potentially dangerous problem for someone her age. Surgery would be necessary, and recovery long and challenging. "And my dog?" was the first question she asked after coming out of sedation following the tests. "Who will take care of him while I'm here?" It was Laura, a middle-aged nurse with a kind smile, who answered, "Don't worry, Eleanor. My daughter stopped by your house and fed him. It seems your dog is very special from what she told me." Eleanor smiled faintly, still under the effect of the medication. "You have no idea how much. He brought me the phone when I fell, as if he knew exactly what I needed." Laura's expression subtly changed, a spark of recognition flashing in her eyes. "He brought you the phone, without you asking?" Seeing Eleanor nod affirmatively, the nurse continued, "What breed is your dog?" "A German shepherd. Big, strong, although he arrived at my door quite injured about a week ago." Laura sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly interested. "Eleanor, before working here, I worked for 5 years with a rescue unit that used trained dogs. The behavior you described, it's not natural for an ordinary dog." The conversation that followed opened up a world of possibilities. Laura explained that rescue dogs are trained to perform specific actions in emergencies, including fetching objects that can help trapped or injured victims. "I think your new friend might have a very interesting past, Eleanor. If you allow me, I can do some digging." And so, while Eleanor prepared for the surgery scheduled for the next day, Laura began her search. Using her old contacts in the rescue field, she sent photos of Guardian that her daughter had taken, and a detailed description of his behavior. The response came faster than expected. Late that same night, while Eleanor slept under sedation, Laura received a call from her former supervisor. "This dog. I'm almost certain it's Guardian, one of the best dogs we ever trained. He disappeared during a flood rescue operation about 6 months ago. We searched for weeks but eventually assumed the worst. He's an exceptional animal, trained for the most challenging situations. If it's really him, your friend found a true hero." While this discovery was unfolding miles away, Arthur was living his own torment. Since the day he had abandoned the dog, disturbing dreams plagued his nights. Images of the trapped animal looking at him with those eyes full of incomprehension, mixed with other painful memories he had buried deep in his mind. On one particularly difficult night, he woke up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. The memory of his wife, Marianne, smiled at him in his dream. The same smile he last saw before the flood that took her away 3 years ago. Back then, they had a German shepherd, a faithful companion who was also swept away by the merciless waters. The new dog, who had arrived at his farm as an unwanted gift from a well-meaning friend, looked too similar, bringing back memories he desperately tried to drown. "I can't take this anymore," he muttered to the empty room, getting up in the pre-dawn darkness. With determined steps, he grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the isolated cabin. He needed to check, to be sure, the animal. No, He couldn't even fully form the thought. Part of him wanted to find the dog still alive. Another part feared precisely that, because it would mean facing the cruelty of his own act. Upon reaching the cabin and shining the flashlight inside, Arthur's heart skipped a beat. Empty. The place was empty, except for the hole under the fence that evidenced the animal's escape. A contradictory mix of relief and worry washed over him. Where could he have gone? Would he survive? In the 2 weeks that followed, while Eleanor underwent surgery and began her recovery, in the hospital, Arthur started a silent search around the area. He told no one what he had done, but his eyes scanned every corner of the town, every mention of a found dog. When he heard at the tavern that the new teacher had taken in a German shepherd, something inside him clenched painfully. Could it be the same animal? And if it was, what would he do? Confess his cowardly act? Try to get the dog back? Or simply ignore it, letting the animal have a better life with someone who truly cared? These questions tormented him as he watched Eleanor's house from afar, noticing the dark windows and lack of movement that confirmed she hadn't yet returned from the hospital. During one of these observations, he caught a glimpse of the dog in the yard. It was him, undoubtedly. The same majestic build, the same attentive gaze. He looked recovered, strong again. Something inside Arthur twisted into an emotion he couldn't name. At the hospital, Eleanor's recovery progressed well, but it would be a long process. "Do you have someone who can help you when you return home?" the doctor asked during the morning visit. "You'll need assistance with many basic activities for a few weeks." Eleanor sighed, facing the reality of her solitude. Her children lived far away, busy with their own lives. Close friends she hadn't yet made in the new town. "I'll manage, doctor. I always have." It was Laura who offered a solution. "My daughter Bee can help out a few hours a day. She's on break from college and adored your dog. And speaking of him," she paused, smiling, "we confirmed it really is Guardian, the rescue dog who disappeared. An extraordinary animal, trained for extreme situations." Eleanor's eyes shone with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "So that's why he knew exactly what to do when I fell. But how did he end up at my door? And why was he so injured?" These questions hung in the air, unanswered for now. What no one knew was that while they discussed Guardian's heroic past, Arthur was on his farm, battling his own demons, trying to gather the courage to do something he hadn't done in a long time: ask for forgiveness. After 3 weeks in the hospital, Eleanor was finally discharged. With the help of Laura and Bee, she returned home, where she was greeted by an exultant Guardian who seemed to perfectly understand her fragile condition, moving with extra care around her. "He knows you're hurt," Bee observed, impressed by the animal's sensitivity. "Look how attentive he is to your every move." In the days that followed, a routine was established. Bee came in the morning, helped with household chores, and left after lunch. In the afternoon, it was Guardian who took on the role of attentive caregiver. He followed Eleanor around the house, offering support when she needed to stand, fetching objects when asked, and, most surprisingly, seeming to anticipate her needs, like dragging her cane closer when he sensed she was preparing to get up. "You're more than a dog," Eleanor murmured, stroking the animal's head as they rested on the porch on warm afternoons. "You're an angel who appeared when I needed you most." As her recovery progressed, Eleanor began sharing Guardian's extraordinary story with the locals. It was during a visit to Mary's bakery, her first longer outing since the accident, that she shared details about the dog's special training. He was trained to find people in rubble after earthquakes, to locate avalanche victims, and even to identify lost people in forests by scent, she explained, as a small group gathered around her, fascinated by the story. Among the listeners was the town mayor, Mayor Thompson, a man with white hair and an easy smile, who immediately saw an opportunity. "Eleanor, our annual county fair is just a month away. It's the town's most important event. Would you agree to do a demonstration with Guardian? It would be inspiring for our community, especially the children." The idea took on a life of its own. In the following weeks, news about the hero dog Living with the retired teacher spread not only through Ridgeview, but also to neighboring towns. Interest was so high that the mayor decided to include a special presentation on rescue and first aid in the fair's program, featuring Guardian as a living example. Meanwhile, Arthur watched these developments from afar, increasingly consumed by conflicting feelings. The dog he had tried to eliminate from his life was now becoming a local celebrity, admired by everyone. The bitter irony of the situation did not escape him. It was on a rainy afternoon, 3 months after the initial abandonment, that fate finally brought their divergent paths together. Eleanor, now significantly recovered, walked slowly through the town square, leaning on her cane and faithfully accompanied by Guardian, when she encountered Arthur leaving the bank. The recognition was instantaneous, not between the woman and the farmer who had never been formally introduced, but between the dog and his former tormentor. Everyone who witnessed the scene expected an aggressive reaction from Guardian. Instead, what they saw left them perplexed. The dog stopped, looked intently at Arthur, and after a moment of tension, approached calmly, stopping a few feet away, showing no fear or anger, just a look of recognition. Arthur stood motionless, as if frozen in time. Those eyes, the same ones that had haunted his nightmares, now regarded him not with accusation, but with a serenity that pierced all his defenses. "Do you know my dog?" Eleanor asked, curious about the unusual reaction from both. The farmer swallowed hard, unable to find words. How could he explain? How could he tell the truth without revealing the extent of his own cruelty? Yes, I've seen him before," was all he managed to murmur before quickly walking away, leaving Eleanor intrigued and Guardian watching his departure with that same enigmatic tranquility. That brief encounter shook Arthur more deeply than any other event in recent years. The absence of judgment in the animal's eyes, the ability to stand before him without holding a grudge. It was a lesson he didn't know if he deserved, but one he certainly needed. When the county fair finally arrived, the whole town was buzzing. Colorful booths decorated the central square. The smell of classic fair food filled the air, and festive lights twinkled as dusk approached. At the center of attention, a special area had been reserved for Guardian's demonstration. Eleanor, dressed simply but with a special sparkle in her eyes, led the animal proudly. He can show how to find people in hiding spots, how to retrieve specific objects in emergencies, and even how to offer physical support to someone who is weak, she explained to the crowd gathering around. The demonstration began, and with each command, each perfect execution, the audience's applause grew. Children watched wide-eyed, seniors commented impressed, and even the most skeptical had to acknowledge the extraordinary level of training and intelligence of the animal. "It's incredible how he can follow such complex commands," commented the local pharmacist as Guardian located a child who had been purposely hidden among the booths, following only the scent of an object belonging to her. Among the crowd, partially hidden by the shadows of the trees surrounding the square, stood Arthur. His eyes never left the dog while an emotional storm brewed within him. Remorse, admiration, shame, everything swirled together in a vortex he could no longer ignore. The highlight of the demonstration came when they simulated a rescue situation. A volunteer pretended to be trapped under a lightweight structure. In seconds, Guardian assessed the situation, found an access route, and guided the rescuers to the victim with impressive precision. "This dog saved my life," Eleanor declared at the end, her voice thick with emotion. "When I fell and couldn't reach the phone, he was the one who brought it to me. Without his special training, I could have been on the floor for hours, with much more serious consequences." The crowd applauded enthusiastically as the mayor took the microphone. "Inspired by Guardian's example, we've decided to create a community dog training program in our town, not just for rescue, but also for supporting seniors and people with special needs. Who could have imagined that a dog who appeared out of nowhere, injured and abandoned, would bring so much good to our community?" The words, "injured and abandoned," struck Arthur like a physical blow. Suddenly, he found himself moving through the crowd, driven by a force he didn't fully understand himself. People made way, surprised by the determination on his usually closed-off face. "I can help," he said, his voice louder than intended, causing all eyes to turn to him. "I have a large farm. I can offer space for this training." A stunned silence followed his declaration. Arthur, the bitter man who barely spoke to his neighbors, offering help? It seemed surreal. But before anyone could question it, Guardian approached him sitting calmly at his feet, as if endorsing his offer. Eleanor, sensing something deeper happening, smiled gently. "That would be wonderful, Mr. Arthur. My name is Arthur." For the first time in years, he felt something akin to peace as he spoke his own name. That night marked the beginning of a transformation, not just for Arthur, but for the entire community. The dog training project started small, with a few enthusiastic volunteers and 3 dogs belonging to local residents. Guardian naturally became the role model, the living example of what a well-trained dog could achieve. However, the path wouldn't be easy. Distrust towards Arthur persisted. Many questioned his true intentions, whispering theories about hidden motives, or simply betting that his enthusiasm would soon fade. Why would he really be interested in helping? They asked at the tavern, in the lines at the store, in conversations after Sunday service. Arthur hasn't cared about anything but himself since he got here. These doubts affected him more than he admitted. On one particularly difficult afternoon, after overhearing disparaging comments while buying materials to build training obstacles, he almost gave up. It was Eleanor who found him sitting alone on his porch, gaze lost on the horizon, hands restlessly crumpling a piece of paper. "People always fear what they don't understand," she said, sitting beside him uninvited. "Change is scary, especially when it comes from where you least expect it." Arthur looked at her, surprised not only by her presence, but by the simple wisdom of her words. "How do you know what I'm feeling?" Eleanor smiled with that mix of sweetness and strength that had earned the respect of even the town's biggest skeptics. "I recognize the signs. I've been there. When I lost my grandson, I thought I'd never find purpose again. People looked at me with pity, some with impatience when my grief didn't pass in the time they thought appropriate." The mention of loss struck a sensitive chord in Arthur. Before he could stop himself, words he had guarded for years escaped. "My wife died in a flood 3 years ago. Nobody here knows. I never told anyone." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but welcoming. A mutual understanding that didn't require many words. "We had a dog, looked a lot like Guardian," he continued, his voice choked. "He was lost in the flood too. When a friend showed up with another German Shepherd as a gift, saying it would do me good, I couldn't stand it. It was like reliving everything." Understanding dawned on Eleanor like lightning. "It was you," she whispered, not as an accusation, but as a realization. "You were the one who abandoned Guardian." Arthur lowered his head, shame burning his face. "I locked him in an old cabin with little water and no food. I wanted him out. My life. I have no excuse." In any other context, with any other person, that confession might have resulted in anger, indignation. But Eleanor had lived long enough to know that judgment rarely helps someone become better. What matters isn't what you did in the past, but what you're doing now to make amends, she said finally, placing her wrinkled hand on his. "And it seems, even Guardian has already forgiven you." Indeed, the dog had silently approached during the conversation, and now rested at Arthur's feet, as if he knew exactly what was happening in that crucial moment. The confession to Eleanor was just the beginning. In the days that followed, Arthur worked with renewed determination on the dog project. Every obstacle built, every hour dedicated to training was a form of silent atonement, an apology not only to the animal he had mistreated, but to himself. The real test, however, would come sooner than anyone could have predicted. 5 months after Guardian's initial abandonment, torrential rains began to fall on the region. Day after day, the water volume increased, causing the river that cut through town to rise dangerously. "This reminds me of a few years back," commented the older residents, referring to the last major flood that had affected the area. "The river's rising too fast." On the morning of the 5th day of non-stop rain, The inevitable happened. The river overflowed at several points, flooding the lower parts of town. Among the affected homes was that of Peter and Louise Garcia, an elderly couple, living near the bank. Water invaded their house with frightening speed, forcing them to seek refuge on the roof. The news spread quickly. The Garcias are stranded. The waters already reached their roof. Emergency services were called, but access was compromised. The bridge leading to their neighborhood had been partially damaged by the force of the current. While firefighters from the next town tried to find an alternative route, the elderly couple's situation became increasingly critical. It was in this moment of collective desperation that Guardian, without any command, simply disappeared from Eleanor's house. At first, she thought he'd been spooked by the storm. But the truth soon emerged when a young man ran up, soaked from head to toe. "Eleanor, your dog! He's swimming towards the Garcia's house." The news spread like wildfire. Dozens of residents headed to the riverbank, braving the heavy rain to witness what seemed like a suicide mission. Guardian swam against the furious current, using all the strength of his powerful muscles, guided by a rescue instinct that surpassed any instinct for self-preservation. Among the onlookers was Arthur, his face a mask of concern and admiration. Without a second thought, he ran to his tractor, the only vehicle in town capable of crossing partially flooded areas. "I'm going to try to reach them from behind, through the farm road," he yelled to the group of men discussing how to help. "That road is higher, maybe it's still passable." While Arthur battled mud and water with his tractor, Guardian had achieved the impossible, reaching the Garcia's house. With impressive skill, he climbed onto the roof where the elderly couple waited, shivering from cold and fear. "A dog!" exclaimed Louise between tears of surprise. "Dear God, a dog came to help us." Guardian wasted no time. He gently took Mr. Peters' shirt, sleeve in his mouth, guiding him to the safest part of the roof. Then, he positioned himself to offer support when the current slammed hardest against the house's already fragile structure. Meanwhile, Arthur managed to clear a path to a point close enough to see the house. From there, he signaled the firefighters, who had finally arrived, indicating the best route for the rescue. With the help of his tractor, a rope was stretched between sturdy trees, creating a lifeline to the house. The rescue was tense but successful. First Louise, then Peter, were brought to safety using the rope as a guide. Guardian, incredibly, swam back alone, once again demonstrating his extraordinary abilities. The operation had been a success, but the danger hadn't passed. While everyone celebrated the rescue of the elderly couple, no one noticed that the bank where Arthur had parked, the tractor was beginning to give way. It was a sudden noise that alerted everyone, a rumble followed by the sound of collapsing earth. "Arthur!" someone screamed, seeing the farmer and part of the bank slide into the turbulent water. Panic seized the crowd. Arthur, who had never learned to swim properly, struggled against the current, being rapidly swept away by the enraged river. The firefighters, still busy with the elderly couple, wouldn't reach him in time. That's when Guardian, without hesitating for a second, launched himself back into the water. Swimming with fierce determination, he reached Arthur in minutes. The farmer, already nearly strengthless, clung to the animal's fur as if it were his last hope. And indeed it was. With impressive technique, Guardian didn't try to swim directly against the current, but diagonally, using the currents to his advantage to gradually approach the bank. The firefighters, noticing the strategy, positioned themselves at the point where the dog was heading. When they finally reached the bank, Arthur was semi-conscious, but alive. "The dog, save the dog first," were his first words as the firefighters pulled him from the water. But Guardian was already there, shaking the water from his coat as if this double rescue were just another normal day in his extraordinary life. That flood, like so many other trials, passed. The waters receded, leaving behind material destruction, but also stories of courage and solidarity that would become part of Ridgeview's collective memory. And none of those stories would be told with more admiration than that of Guardian, the dog who swam against the current twice to save lives. For Arthur, the near-death experience was transformative. During his recovery, he spoke openly for the first time about his past, about losing Marianne, and how unprocessed grief had poisoned his heart. "I was so focused on my pain that I turned into exactly the kind of person my wife despised most," he confessed to Eleanor, who visited him daily. "Someone bitter, unable to see beyond their own suffering." "It's never too late to change," she replied, with the wisdom of someone who had also found new purpose after great loss. "And you've already started down that path." 8 months after the initial abandonment, Arthur's farm had transformed. What was once a place of isolation and bitterness now buzzed with activity. The dog training project had gained official structure and support. With backing from the town council and donations from regional businesses, a modest training center had been built. "Who would have thought," commented the residents, "that grumpy old Arthur would become the most dedicated man in town, all because of a dog?" Indeed, the change was remarkable. The once taciturn farmer was now seen smiling, patiently explaining training techniques to young volunteers, sharing stories at community gatherings, and always by his side, like a faithful shadow, was Guardian, the catalyst for all this transformation. However, not everyone was convinced. Some people still looked suspiciously at Arthur's sudden change, questioning if it would last or if there was some hidden agenda. "He sold part of his land to finance this project," they commented. "Nobody does that without an ulterior motive." What they didn't know was that every financial sacrifice, every hour dedicated to training, every moment spent educating children about respecting animals was part of Arthur's process of redemption. Not for others, but for himself. 10 months after the abandonment, during the traditional annual folk gathering, a local cultural event bringing the community together to celebrate folk music, one of the most moving moments of this transformative journey occurred. On a makeshift stage under simple but welcoming lights, Old Joe, the town's most respected folk musician, with his 80 years of wisdom, called for silence and began strumming his guitar. The crowd quieted, recognizing the start of a story song, a tradition where local histories are turned into verse and music. "Gonna tell you in my verses with respect and with care, about a man who walked lonely, burdened by despair, lost all that he cherished in a flood's cruel sweep, became hard as granite, his soul buried deep." All eyes turned to Arthur, standing at the back of the crowd, Guardian seated faithfully beside him. The farmer felt his face burn, but not with shame, with an emotion he couldn't name. Tried to shed the memory, cast the innocent aside, a dog who only offered love, with nowhere left to hide. But God works in mysterious ways. His paths we cannot chart. What seemed like just an ending was a brand new start. The verses continued, narrating the entire journey. The abandonment, Guardian's escape, meeting Eleanor, the rescues, the transformation. When Old Joe finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Those who judge unknowing of the pain, another bears, don't know that life gives everyone, despite their fears and cares, a chance to start all over, be better than before. And that's why Arthur, tonight, is our town's true hero, and more. At the song's end, something unexpected happened. Mayor Thompson stood up and walked over to Arthur. In his hands, an official document. "On behalf of the Ridgeview Town Council, it is with great honor that I officially declare any past mistakes forgiven and recognize your extraordinary contribution to our community." This official document establishes the Guardian Training Center as a cultural asset and public service entity for our town. What followed was one of those rare moments of collective communion that define a place's identity. People who once looked at Arthur with suspicion now approached to shake his hand, pat his back, share words of admiration. Redemption hadn't come overnight. It was built day by day, act by act, choice by choice, like a mosaic formed from small pieces that, seen from afar, create an image of surprising beauty. In the months that followed, the impact of Guardian and Arthur's story spread beyond Ridgeview's borders. Regional newspapers published reports, a state TV station ran a special feature, and the training center began receiving visitors from neighboring towns. Inspired by the case, local council members passed new animal protection laws, including stricter penalties for abandonment and abuse, as well as incentives for responsible adoption. The story of redemption had transformed into concrete change, into a lasting legacy. For Eleanor, witnessing this entire transformation brought a special kind of joy. At 68, she had found a new purpose she never imagined when she moved to Ridgeview. Seeking only peace and distance from painful memories, Guardian didn't just save physical lives. She commented one afternoon, having coffee on the porch with Arthur, watching the sun set behind the hills. He saved something much more precious. He saved souls. Arthur nodded, words unnecessary. Between two who had walked together through the valley of the shadow and found light on the other side. Exactly 1 year after the abandonment, as the calendar completed its perfect cycle, the region faced its worst drought in decades. Reservoirs dwindled, crops began to wither, and desperation threatened to settle once again in this community, already so tested by nature's forces. It was then that Arthur's knowledge of the land, acquired over decades of farming, combined with Guardian's extraordinary skills. The dog, among his many specializations, had been trained to locate underground water sources, a skill developed for finding survivors in cave-ins that would prove crucial now. Together, man and animal traversed the region, identifying potential spots for drilling wells. Where Arthur suspected water based on his empirical knowledge, Guardian confirmed with his exceptional scent detection, trained to pinpoint moisture even deep underground. "It's incredible," commented a geologist called in to guide the drilling. "The accuracy with which you pinpointed these locations. You've saved us weeks of investigation." This collaboration, the traditional knowledge of a once isolated farmer and the modern skills of a specially trained dog, became the perfect symbol of how adversity can be transformed when different strengths unite for the greater good. The water that began gushing from the first successful well was more than just a vital resource. It was the materialization of a completed journey, from abandonment to redemption, from loneliness to community, from pain to healing. That night, as the town celebrated the discovery that would save their crops and ensure water through the drought, Arthur sat alone for a moment by the new well. Guardian approached silently, resting his head on his knee. "Thank you," the farmer whispered, stroking the animal's head. It wasn't just thanks for the well, the water, the rescues. It was for something much deeper, for a second chance he never imagined he deserved. The story that began with abandonment had transformed into a year-long journey of redemption, forgiveness, and rebuilding. Arthur, who wanted to rid himself of painful memories, learned that facing them was the only path to true liberation. And Guardian, trained to save lives in extreme situations, ended up saving much more than physical beings. He restored the soul of an entire community and the broken heart of a man who had lost his humanity. On moonlit nights, when silence falls over Ridgeview, they say you can see a man and his faithful companion walking side by side through the fields, two silhouettes against the starry horizon, no longer two lonely souls, but a partnership reminding everyone that redemption is within reach for those brave enough to face their mistakes and transform them into something beautiful. And if you asked any local what the greatest lesson from this extraordinary story is, the answer would be unanimous. Never underestimate the transformative power of forgiveness, whether offered by an animal who knows only loyalty or by a community that learns to see beyond appearances. For in the deepest scars, in the most painful stories, in the hardest falls, often lies the beginning of incredible journeys that can inspire generations.